The sudden passing of TK Carter sent shockwaves through the public, catching nearly everyone off guard. And just when people thought the story couldn't get any heavier, more layers began to unfold, each one more emotionally charged than the last. Initially, federal authorities moved quickly to shut down speculation, announcing that there were no signs of foul play. They attributed his death to natural causes, citing Carter's well-documented history of ongoing health struggles. But that explanation didn't hold for long. As time passed, individuals familiar with the investigation began quietly sharing new details. According to these sources, investigators uncovered far more at the scene than the public was told. There were prescription pill bottles, along with a concealed note, one that allegedly shed light on Carter's state of mind. The message suggested a deeply personal struggle, revealing that Carter had reached a breaking point, overwhelmed by relentless criticism and hostility within the industry. If true, it paints a far more tragic picture of his final days. TK Carter was found deceased on January 9, 2026, at the age of 69, inside his home in Duarte, California. Reports indicate that law enforcement responded to a welfare check request at approximately 5:42 p.m., prompted by growing concern from family members who hadn't heard from him in several days. Their fears were heartbreakingly confirmed when authorities arrived at the residence. Carter was discovered unresponsive near a marble table, and officials quickly documented the death before notifying his loved ones. At the time, no official cause was released. While the location where he was found led some to speculate about a possible head injury, investigators offered no further clarification in the initial announcement, leaving many questions unanswered. In the days that followed, additional reports began to fill in the gaps. Several media outlets revealed that Carter had been dealing with significant medical issues well before his death. His brother, Harold Carter, later confirmed that TK's health had been declining for months, marked by serious complications including diabetes and heart-related conditions. Together, these revelations reframed the narrative, turning a shocking loss into a deeply sobering reflection on health, pressure, and the unseen battles people often fight alone. According to a law enforcement source who spoke with TMZ, when Carter's family requested a welfare check, they informed authorities that he had been dealing with high blood pressure. Taking that into account, investigators initially dismissed the possibility of foul play altogether. Still, once the news broke, the internet responded instantly. Tributes poured in from every direction, painting a picture of a man who left a deep mark on the industry. Jamie Foxx honored Carter as a foundational figure in comedy, calling him a king whose influence shaped countless careers. Viola Davis followed with a heartfelt message of her own, describing him as a rare talent with extraordinary depth, someone who felt like family and whose presence left a lasting impression. Carter's longtime publicist, Tony Freeman, echoed those sentiments, remembering him as a consummate professional with a genuine spirit, an artist whose work crossed genres and consistently delivered humor, honesty, and humanity. The messages were moving, sincere, and full of love. Yet beneath all the praise lingered one unresolved question: what really happened to TK Carter? Yes, he battled numerous health issues, but none of them seemed to fully explain the circumstances of his final moments. And that's where the story takes an unsettling turn. Sources close to the investigation claimed that authorities uncovered troubling evidence inside Carter's home, pill bottles and a note that added an entirely new dimension to the case. Those who allegedly read the note say it revealed a man who felt worn down, targeted, and exhausted by years of hostility within the industry. After decades of navigating Hollywood, Carter had reportedly reached his breaking point and made a devastating decision. That revelation raises even bigger questions. Who was coming after him? And why? In his final interview before his death, Carter openly acknowledged that he had enemies, critics and detractors who never seemed to let up. During that difficult period, one of the few bright spots in his life was a friend who believed in him, Tasha Smith. She helped secure him a role in the HBO miniseries The Coroner, a project that would unexpectedly become pivotal. Initially, the directors had no intention of casting Carter as the addict Gary McCullough. But Carter was relentless. He didn't politely ask once and move on, he pressed, again and again, with an intensity that suggested he felt personally bound to the role. At first, his persistence was dismissed as noise, the kind that seasoned directors learn to tune out. But Carter refused to fade into the background. He kept advocating for himself, making it impossible to ignore how deeply he wanted the part. Eventually, worn down by his determination, and perhaps unsettled by how strongly he pushed, they gave in. Carter got the role. What seemed like a hard-earned victory, however, may have come at a hidden cost. Behind closed doors, his passion wasn't seen as commitment, it was seen as defiance. And in an industry that values obedience more than authenticity, defiance is dangerous. Hollywood has long favored those who fall in line quietly, who play the game without challenging it. People who speak too honestly, who assert boundaries, who refuse to blend seamlessly into the system, are often labeled as problems. Carter either didn't realize that, or he simply didn't care. He believed talent and truth should outweigh politics. But Hollywood doesn't operate on belief, it operates on control. The moment Carter made it clear he had a voice, opinions, and limits, his status shifted. He was no longer just an asset, he was a liability. What makes the entire situation even more disturbing is a detail many overlooked at the time. In that same final interview, Carter casually admitted he was a party animal. He laughed it off, describing regular substance use as if it were nothing more than a harmless quirk. At the time, no one flinched. In an industry infamous for excess, it barely registered. But in retrospect, that moment feels haunting. It wasn't casual honesty, it was a glimpse into a downward spiral already in motion. The fact that Carter chose to share something so personal, so unfiltered, speaks volumes. Most celebrities are trained to conceal their vulnerabilities, to polish imperfections into something palatable. Carter did the opposite. He spoke openly, almost carelessly, as though he were tired of pretending everything was fine. Looking back, it feels like a quiet cry for help, or a warning disguised as humor, one that went unnoticed until it was too late. For fans who remember him as charismatic, intense, and commanding on screen, this side of Carter may come as a shock. But the truth is, his struggles weren't new. Years earlier, in a 2000 interview with the Los Angeles Times, Carter had already laid everything bare. He spoke about addiction without glamour, without bravado, just raw honesty. He described it not as a phase or a rumor, but as a deeply ingrained battle that had quietly shaped his life for years. And now, in light of everything that followed, those words feel less like history and more like a warning the world didn't fully hear. What unsettled so many people wasn't just that Carter opened up, it was how precise he was. He didn't speak vaguely about addiction or hide behind generalities. Instead, he admitted something that sounded almost harmless on the surface. He said he was addicted to Coca-Cola. To some, it seemed insignificant, even amusing. But anyone who understands addiction knows better. The substance is rarely the point. Addiction is about reliance, about soothing discomfort, about repeating a behavior even when you're aware it's slowly damaging you. By mentioning cola, Carter wasn't downplaying his struggle. He was revealing its foundation. He was acknowledging that once something took hold of him, letting go wasn't easy. He was naming his addictive nature without dressing it up. When he said, "I just totally felt for Gary. I've had substance problems and cola addiction," it went far beyond method acting. That wasn't an actor casually relating to a character, it was a man confessing that he recognized himself in Gary's fractures. The character wasn't just a role he admired, it was a reflection. Carter saw his own compulsions, his own battles with control, staring back at him from the page. That's why he chased the role with such intensity. He wasn't trying to perform Gary. He was trying to be understood through him. But that kind of emotional transparency doesn't sit comfortably in the entertainment industry. Hollywood prefers a buffer between the artist and the art, a safe distance that keeps everything controlled and digestible. Carter erased that boundary. He brought his rawness directly into his work, injecting truth into a space built on illusion. It made his performances electric and deeply real, but it also made people uneasy. Authenticity, in a world dependent on masks, is disruptive. As his career moved forward, the pressure tightened. Success didn't bring freedom, it brought expectations. He was supposed to fall in line, smooth out his edges, become easier to manage. Interviews stopped being conversations and turned into rehearsed acts. Appearances became obligations rather than expressions. Every misstep was magnified, every honest moment scrutinized. For someone already wrestling with addiction and impulse, that kind of constant surveillance can feel unbearable. Carter coped the only way he knew how, by numbing, by distracting himself, by leaning into behaviors that offered temporary relief while quietly causing long-term harm. Still, he refused to lie. That refusal became both his defining strength and his greatest liability. He spoke plainly about his flaws, without filters or PR polish. Some people admired that openness. Others viewed it as reckless. Behind closed doors, it made him dangerous, not in a dramatic sense, but in a logistical one. He was unpredictable. Hard to contain. And in an industry that runs on control and consistency, unpredictability is unforgivable. With hindsight, the sadness is unavoidable. The warning signs were always there. His relentless persistence that irritated directors. His honesty that unsettled interviewers. The confessions that slipped past audiences unnoticed. Carter wasn't chasing attention or validation for its own sake. He was trying to be seen, fully, honestly, in a system that only wanted the polished version of him. When he finally secured the role of Gary, it felt like proof that his voice mattered. Instead of shielding him, that moment stripped him bare. Without anyone realizing it at the time, he became a quiet cautionary tale. Not because he lacked talent or discipline, but because he refused to mute himself. He wouldn't shrink to fit the mold. That refusal cost him deeply, but it also left behind something rare, a story that feels raw, human, and painfully real. All his admissions, about addiction, partying, cola, and his bond with a broken character, circle the same truth. Carter was fighting on multiple fronts. Against his own impulses. Against an industry that values obedience over honesty. Against a system that punishes vulnerability. The signs may have been easy to dismiss back then, but now they're impossible to ignore. His story isn't just about a role or an interview. It's about what happens when someone chooses truth in a place that survives on pretense. I understand that kind of loss intimately. I lost my father to substance-related causes, and that kind of grief doesn't announce itself. It doesn't crash in with sirens or give you time to brace. It arrives quietly and settles into your body, changing how you breathe, how you remember, how you move through the world. Losing him broke something fundamental inside me, something that never healed the way people assume it should. And it didn't stop there. Over the years, I lost friends the same way. One after another. Names turned into memories. Memories turned into weight. Eventually, grief stopped feeling like a moment and started feeling like a constant presence. Somehow, I made it through. Not untouched, not stronger, just lucky. Right place, right time, the right hand reaching out when it mattered. That's all it was. Luck. And even with that fortune, nothing was erased. You don't forget this kind of pain. You learn to live with it humming quietly in the background, reminding you how fragile everything is. I carried Gary with me constantly, not literally, but deeply. I slept with that awareness. I breathed it. Every boundary I tried to hold, every time I chose restraint over escape, Gary was there. A reminder of how fast things can unravel. How easily relief turns into ruin. He wasn't comforting. He was heavy. But he was necessary. He became a symbol of everything I couldn't afford to lose again, everything I had to protect, no matter the cost. When loss sits that close to your life, it sharpens your vision. You begin to notice things others dismiss. You see how pain slips behind charm, how addiction learns to camouflage itself with jokes, confidence, and well-timed smiles. You recognize the laughter that's a little too loud, the insistence that everything is fine when the eyes are quietly asking someone, anyone, to look closer. That's why Carter's story doesn't feel distant or abstract. It feels familiar. What many people gloss over is that Carter had already crossed a serious line long before his final chapter. He was arrested for substance-related charges twice in the 1990s. Not once. Twice. That isn't a footnote or a youthful misstep exaggerated by time. That's evidence. Evidence of a long-standing struggle that didn't appear suddenly and didn't magically resolve itself just because years passed. Arrests don't happen in isolation. They're rarely the beginning of a problem, they're the moment a private collapse becomes public. For Carter, those moments should have set off alarms. They should have prompted deeper concern, closer support, harder conversations. But instead, they faded into the background. Whether he convinced people he was okay or they chose to believe it hardly matters. Denial is often a group effort, especially when the truth is uncomfortable and disruptive. There's a dangerous blindness that surrounds talented people, particularly in industries that profit from their productivity. As long as the work continues, as long as the performances land, as long as the image holds together, the internal damage is easy to ignore. Addiction doesn't always announce itself with chaos. Sometimes it looks like discipline. Sometimes it looks like success. Sometimes it looks like someone who still shows up and still delivers. And that's exactly what makes it lethal. Carter's ability to appear fine wasn't proof that he was fine. It was proof that he had learned how to endure just enough to keep going. He learned how to compartmentalize pain, how to perform normalcy while unraveling in private. That skill is often mistaken for strength, even admired. But it should scare us. Because every successful performance of "I'm okay" reinforces the lie that silence equals resilience and asking for help equals failure. Yes, Carter's death is a loss to the industry. That truth is everywhere, in headlines, tributes, and carefully chosen words of remembrance. His talent mattered. His presence mattered. But if we stop there, we miss the deeper tragedy. The greater loss is not what the industry no longer has, it's the human being who was struggling long before the end. Those left behind are doing what people always do after loss. They share memories, post messages, light candles, speak into the silence. Grief drives us toward ritual because ritual gives us the illusion that love can still reach backward in time. But beneath all of it is a growing list of unanswered questions. Not questions fueled by gossip, but by confusion, pain, and the unbearable need to understand why this keeps happening. Why weren't the warning signs treated as warnings? Why do we accept "he's doing better now" as an ending instead of a checkpoint? Why does time without incident get mistaken for recovery? Recovery isn't a finish line. It's fragile, ongoing, and easily destabilized by stress, isolation, and pressure. Pretending otherwise doesn't protect people, it puts them at risk. When I think about my father, about Gary, about the friends I've lost, I think about how many moments existed where someone could have leaned in closer. How often stability gets confused for healing. Just because someone is functioning doesn't mean they aren't drowning. Just because they're working doesn't mean they aren't hurting. And just because they say they're okay doesn't mean they are. There's also a discomfort people have with long-term vigilance. It's exhausting to keep checking in, to keep caring without clear milestones or satisfying resolutions. Believing in a recovery narrative lets everyone relax. But addiction doesn't respect comfort. It thrives in assumptions, in neglect, in the moment people stop paying attention. Carter's story forces us to confront how poorly we deal with long-term struggle. We love comeback stories. We love redemption arcs. We want to believe that once someone falls and stands back up, the danger has passed. But real life doesn't work that way. Surviving once doesn't mean you're safe, it often just means you've learned how to hide it better. The loss to the industry matters. But the loss of a life matters more. Turning someone into a cautionary tale after they're gone doesn't absolve us of responsibility. Mourning shouldn't only honor what someone gave us, it should interrogate what failed them. Otherwise, we're just repeating the same tragedy with different names. I live with the awareness that I could have been one of those names. That awareness grounds me, and it angers me. Anger at systems that value output over well-being. Anger at cultures that reward silence and punish vulnerability. Anger at how easily loss becomes normalized instead of treated as the emergency it is. That anger isn't destructive. It's clarifying. Survival carries responsibility. Remembering Carter isn't about glorifying pain or romanticizing struggle. It's about refusing to let the story end quietly. Substance-related deaths aren't random. They're often the result of missed chances, ignored warnings, and collective denial. Until we're willing to sit with that truth, until we're willing to look past appearances and ask harder questions, the list of losses will keep growing. Making peace doesn't mean abandoning inquiry. Healing doesn't require forgetting. We can grieve and still demand better for those who are still here. Because every time someone says, "No one saw this coming," there's usually a quieter truth underneath. People saw fragments, but no one wanted to connect them. And that brings us back to the questions that refuse to go away. Why would authorities withhold key details if everything was straightforward? Why was someone with a documented history of substance issues living alone? If things had worsened, why wasn't he in structured care or a support program? Those questions aren't accusations. They're alarms. And ignoring them doesn't bring closure, it only guarantees repetition.